lunch, and I was going to say, I'm back, and I'd be the horror story before lunch. But after that introduction, I may maybe stay at the back of the room. I'm just kidding. No, but what you brought up was very important. Is innovation, in a lot of respects, is about connecting. It's about connecting seemingly disparate objects and people and things. And a really good example came up today, and where did he go? The LiDAR guy. I can say that because he was introduced that way. Do you know that LiDAR is used in aerospace? Oh, there you are, right in front of you. It's so obvious, right? Solutions are typically obvious, right? But LiDAR is used in aerospace quite a bit, and the space station, connecting, docking the space station with the vehicles. That's where it came from. It's used for modeling the city of Montreal, doing a 3D model of the city of Montreal. It's being used in surface mining for when you're loading the big haul trucks to make sure that they're balanced, to do the morphology of the material that's put into the haul trucks. So again, it's connecting different applications of a similar technology across domains. So I'm going to talk a little bit today. Oh, I have to use the pointer. I thought you were going to get started. Sorry. Now, Todd, this is the moron one, right? So I'll be very careful. We have this thing going, Todd and I. See? There we go. So, okay, now I got to go back. So, there we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit, extend the conversation we had this morning a little bit about paradigm shifting and basically trying to redefine the mining industry in Canada because we have to change. It's not going to work anymore. And I'm going to bring in some elements of, we already talked about genomics earlier, elements of neurology and cognitive science and psychology quickly, a bit of sports as well because they're all connected and relate to what we're talking about and what we're doing. But first, it's probably worthwhile knowing who we are and what we're doing because you're looking, who is this guy? The guy's the moron shifter, right? Basically, we're a nonprofit organization. We're national in scope. We cover all across Canada. We're doing things with Australia now and linking South Africa. Industry-led. Everything we do, our technical groups are all run and directed by senior people in industry, whether it's at the director level from a mining company all the way up to the senior vice president. Everything is done at the industry's defining needs. Massive pull versus push. That's a paradigm shift in itself in the way we're operating. I mentioned earlier about open innovation, or innovation-driven. We're not research-driven, we're not innovation-driven, we're open innovation-driven. Our first project has 54 organizations in it, 30 companies, 24 universities. The intellectual property is shared. It's shared amongst everybody. Anything that comes up in that project is shared and open for everybody. And surprisingly, I've been on ends of agreements, negotiating agreements with academic institutions and industry in the past, and it's taken 2 to 3 years to get these things done. This was done in 6 months. Can you imagine? Originally it was 26 companies, 26 lawyers signing off on this in 6 months, essentially because their senior executives had signed the bloody thing we've already agreed. Highly collaborative, massive project sizes, 54 people, 54 organizations, hundreds of people in a single project, because we're going after big challenges. We're going after the things that when we talk about them, people push back and say, you can't do that, that is impossible. It is impossible right now. Can't be done, walk away. And I'll give you an example of that. We exist because industry, academia, and government basically said we need an organization to try and put these pieces together and go after these really nasty challenges simply because we can't keep operating this way. We're going in the way of forestry and starting that nosedive. And if you don't believe that, take a look at the markets these days and take a look at the number of firings and take a look at the number of M&As in Canada with mining industries. It's not a pretty sight. Collaboration model, we work with whoever brings value, whether it's research centers, mining exploration industry, other industries like ICT, information communications technology, clean tech, space, defense, institutional funders. We talk a lot with venture capitalists and with other financial institutions. Scotiabank approached us and basically said, how can you guys help us de-risk our investments when we're lending billions of dollars to the mining industry? So again, it's all about de-risk in a lot of respects. Startups, associations, and others. So whatever provides value. We're finding journalists are providing a lot of value for us now too, so they're part of the mix. I'm going to go over this really, really quickly, and there's one piece here that's really very important. But basically, a lot of what happens in our industry, in the minerals industry, is fragmented across Canada, right? Or we're too diversified. We can't talk to each other. Why would a LiDAR guy talk to an architect doing Montreal? Right? Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. Why would a gold guy doing cyanidation talk to a uranium guy, or girl, sorry? I forgot my gender train, my apologies. Why would that happen? It doesn't make sense. And there's all sorts of solution centers across Canada as well, whether it's a CanMed or an RPC down here, or whether it's the NRC or COREM in Quebec, and they're typically all knocking on the doors of the same industry, solving these problems versus how can we work together, leverage all of the assets that we have, and solve the big, big, nasty, hairy challenges that we have. And very interestingly in all of this is this, what we call the tyranny of short-termism. It's really, this is, I'm not from the mining industry, so it's a little perplexing. You come in and a mining project is decades long, yet the measurements are quarterly KPIs. So talking about a 2-year research project or innovation project, they're like, oh, we can't do that, right? Or they agree to it, or the industry agrees to it, and then after 6 months is, I've got my quarterly report coming up to the board, where have you been? You know, what do we have right now? It's a bizarre conundrum to deal with. So we're trying, I'll tell you how we're dealing with that. Innovation investment gap. There is very little investment in innovation in Canada in the minerals industry. It is one of the worst industries in Canada for investing in research, development, and innovation, period. And part of that's by industry and for government both. And it's funny, I used to work with Brian at CanMed a couple of years ago, not too many years ago. You know, left government, and now I'm coming back as a registered lobbyist, basically trying to get the federal government to understand that innovation in the industry is very important, and it's working. The next 2 weeks are actually up in Parliament Hill. I don't know anything about this. I'm a scientist or a failed scientist, so we'll see what happens. But the most important one is the innovation gap. And if you look at what's going on in the industry, the challenges that the industry have are accelerating so fast. The complexity and the challenges are accelerating so fast. The capabilities to deal with these challenges just aren't there. We can't keep up. That gap is widening really fast. So things like, you're all geologists. How hard is it now to find a new deposit? They're at greater depth, they're undercover, they're in remote areas, et cetera. And there's all sorts of geopolitical issues and everything else. It's becoming increasingly harder to find a new deposit. And the ones you find, the running joke is, you know, I have a deposit in my backyard because I have more gold value than dirt in my backyard than some of the deposits out there that are being actively mined. And then we start going deeper, the energy costs go up, there's human issues as well with respect to safety, and it's getting to the point that it's no longer cost effective to go deeper. And then, of course, energy requirements, all-in sustaining costs for energy are up to 35% in some mines. And energy prices are going up. It's not sustainable. The industry itself is not sustainable from a business context, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get into the social license to operate. Transparency was brought up here earlier. Transparency issues with communities, a lot of community backlash. Pascua-Lama project is a really good example down in South America. It was shut down because they lost their social license to operate. It wasn't a technical issue. It's a social license issue. And again, these things are different. And if you look at again, from the financial perspective, costs are going up, returns are going down. It's really simple. We can't operate this this way anymore. Deloitte does a report every year called Tracking the Trends. And this year basically said it is no longer business as usual. You cannot operate they were pointing the finger at us because we're all part of the mining industry, minerals industry. So towards zero waste in mining, what is this? We look at this as a paradigm shifting sort of thing to change how the industry is operating and looking at some of the challenges they have. And some of the things were discussed here this morning, so I'm going to try and connect those if I don't forget. Part of what, when we talk to senior executives in industry or to government is understanding what we're doing because it's totally different. Again, I've done this in ICT and done this with other sectors. It's easy, but when you're explaining it to mining and politicians, it's a little different. So what we're trying to do is put it together into a single paradigm shifting sort of approach. So towards zero waste in mining encompasses everything that CMIC is trying to do. And as I said, it's paradigm shift, reshaping the industry. We're asking different questions, and it's really uncomfortable. I saw some blank stares this morning when I was talking. I'm like, what's he talking about, right? That's some of the reaction we get, which is fine. It takes a while to change. We're changing culture. A lot of this is cultural and business model shifting. But at the end of the day, it's going to make projects that are not viable today, and there's about, 35 billion plus right now that are not viable today, viable. Ring of Fire would have been up and running if we started this 20 years ago. The social license issue would have been gone because of the technical issues would have been dealt with to such an extreme that there wouldn't be an issue. Market cycles, what happens in the industry market cycles? Everybody knows that. We're in one right now, and what's the money like for prospectors and for development projects, right? It's not there. Right? It's not there. If we do this, we can buffer these cycles. And I'll give you an example of that, a real one too, that was really stunning to me. And I was using public perception because that includes social license to operate, environmental regulatory reform, all sorts of things. And the public perception of mining in general is just very bad. You talk to anybody and mining's bad, you destroy the earth, destroy the environment, and there's no good out of it, and yet they forget their cell phone requires how many minerals? Right, there's this little disconnect there. And we do this by asking different questions. I told you I was going to talk about sports. This is a really interesting analogy because, and there's neurological, cognitive, and psychology. See, one slide does all four things, so I'm not going to bore you too much with all this stuff that addresses this in reality. Basically, what happens is we get into ruts. We get into these tracks, and once you start doing that, it's really hard to get out of that. What's your morning routine like? How many people here adjust their morning routine daily? You get out of bed. If your husband is still sleeping, you probably just beat them and say, wake up, you lazy bugger, make my coffee or whatever. That's what happens to me. But you have a set routine. The way you drive into work is the same every single day. You don't shift it up. And industry and businesses do exactly the same thing. You get into these ruts, and you're just skiing along, and there's a cliff ahead, and let's just keep going. Let's buy 5 more ball mills. They don't work. Keep them running. Right? Let's produce more tailings. It's awesome. Let's go. Right? And we just do that. How many new tracks do you see outside? External thinking. There's none. And that's a kind of how a lot of industries operate. So what we're trying to do is ask different questions, getting people to think differently, collaboratively, a little riskier with a bit of oversight. So there's some rescue there if an avalanche happens, because innovation takes risk. So it's totally different questions. What type of questions are we asking? I mentioned this very quickly earlier, is underground mining. The haul trucks underground mining, about 80% of the energy used in these trucks is used to move trucks back and forth with nothing in it. How relevant is that? When you look at this and you go, seriously? I'm spending 80% of my money to move empty trucks? What would happen to an airline company? What would happen to Air Canada if they're spending 80% of their money moving empty airplanes back and forth across the country? They go bankrupt, right? They're gone. But we're doing this underground. So do we want to look at this as having 20% productivity or change the paradigm and have 90% productivity? Remove people from the face, move to continuous mining. And another interesting piece about doing something like this as well is maintenance. It's been estimated up to 75% of the people underground for maintenance of these things. Whereas if you use something differently, continuous, then you reduce that maintenance cost. There's health and safety issues, lots of issues. We're actually developing we've got a draft roadmap in place right now for moving this way, moving the industry this way to continuous mining. And that basically gets rid of drill and blast. No more drill and blast, no people with jack legs, although there's a lot of historical, really cool stuff about that, but let's get them out of the business. Get people away from the face. And there's a company in South Africa actually delivering on this right now. In Canada, it's tougher. We're developing this roadmap. 3 executives we were talking to, we're speaking with them, and the first thing out of their mouths is, we can't do that, that's impossible, forget it. You can do that over there, and there's some very colorful language exchanged and some emails. But again, a year and a half to get them to turn around and go, yes, we can do this. It's a cultural shift, convincing people what and how. But the very critical piece about this, and it goes back to this tyranny issue in this long-term versus short-term, is that we've got 10 to 20-year timelines, but we're breaking them up down to a year. What are you doing in the first year? Get people convinced and building that in and changing as we go. So we're working on, again, changing the paradigm for underground mining. It's not easy, believe me. Yes, I had a vice president from a company, actually he's the managing director of the company now, replaced the CEO recently, and he got up and stood up and said, yeah, why do we have ball mills? This is stupid, right? Let's get in those tracks, let's keep skiing, right? We need 5 ball mills, we're gonna keep them all running all at the same time, it's just crazy. We keep them running continuously, there's no feedstock going there consistently. We have 11 of them, we only need 3. And comminution accounts for 3 to 4% of the world's energy and is 1% efficient. 1% efficient and hasn't changed for 70 years. Again, we're in those ski tracks. We're stuck in a rut. It hasn't changed in 70 years. I had somebody come up to me at a conference last January, CMP, and sat down and said, oh my God, I'm tired of this 0.1% efficiency stuff. Well, let's get together and figure out how to deal with this, right? And how do we get rid of ball mills? We don't need ball mills. How do we get rid of them? And why are we doing it continuously? Now, of course, that brings up an interesting question, and Elizabeth, you mentioned this before, in the same context, is that Yes, that's okay to talk about that with the new mine, but what about the existing ones? And then you reframe that. That's the first feedback we get, right? So you can't do that. What about all these existing ones been around for 40 years? How are you operating it? What are you measuring? How much energy are you using? Where is it being used? Where's the energy waste coming from? And then they start thinking about, okay, let's see if we can actually change how we're operating the ball mills now and recover waste energy from these ball mills. So by tackling this question, you're starting to answer this one and eventually get to the bigger one as well. Everybody knows about this, Mount Poly, and there's no excuse for that whatsoever, but you should be asking the question, do we want to manage tailings? Or do you not want tailings? Is this potentially what a mine would look like in the future, including underground? Can we get that far? Again, paradigm shift, looking at things completely differently, and it's hard to do. The first thing I get back from people is, oh, we can't do that, no tailings, that's impossible. Somebody Brian and I worked with 10 years ago, right, Brian? 10 years ago, a few years ago, was basically talking about no tailings, change the process, look at the process. And that's a very important piece because you can't get to zero tailings and zero waste if you're just looking at it from, we're in exploration, we're in underground mining, we're in processing. That's your problem, that's your problem, versus this is our collective, holistic, corporate problem. Big change, because it's scary how much that happens. This is a cool, I put this one up here because it was, I didn't understand it. I was at a conference it was a workshop a couple weeks ago, and somebody who had developed a flow sheet was putting it to their senior executives. We have two options for this flow sheet. So the all-in sustaining cost for gold for flow sheet 1, so this is how much it's going to cost at $1,800 an ounce. Per ounce of gold we get out, it's going to cost us $1,800 bucks. And we get X ounces of gold, whatever that number is, right? The second flow sheet, it's going to cost $1,200 to extract every ounce of gold, right? To get Y ounces of gold, Y is smaller than X. And I looked at them and said, what? Are you serious? Why are you even looking at this? Oh, it's complicated. And then a bunch of metallurgists, oh, you don't understand the process. Yeah, but to me, if the historical price of gold is $11.77 after the last couple of weeks, it's probably lower than that. Why are you even considering something $1,800? Again, look at the two tracks. You've got those two tracks again. Shouldn't it be $250 an ounce to get X ounces of gold? We held our National Mining Innovation Forum 2 weeks ago in Toronto, and somebody said, 10 years ago, we're designing flow sheets at $250 an ounce. And yes, there's metallurgical complexities, and yes, the grade has gone down, but still, if that's gone down, is that an excuse to still mine at 1,800? It makes absolutely no sense, especially for shareholders. If you're trying to buffer those market cycles and keep people employed and everything else, can you drop that all in sustaining costs so you can do those things? That may not be the right number, maybe 500, but it's certainly better than 1,800. There's a company in the last couple of weeks that ran into a bit of challenges because their all-in sustaining cost is way above the price of gold, and there's some issues there. So we try and package a lot of this stuff to make it really simple, what zero waste in mining is, and taking a look at the challenges from environmental legacy, energy costs, license issues, social license issues, mine closure, the cost of these productivity issues, like how much does energy cost the industry, up to 35% all in sustaining cost. What are these, underground productivity of 20% versus 80? It's a multi-billion-dollar cost. Closure issues. One company, their closure costs are estimated at $2 billion. If you can reduce that by 10%, what can you do with that freed up money? Right, what are you going to do with it? You're going to invest in potentially new methods for exploration, new mines, new communities, research, development, innovation, whatever it is. And we're looking at, and this is a very important piece, I mentioned it before, is connecting the life of mine continuum from exploration all the way through to environment. Can you, with the exploration data, predict with 5% confidence environmental impacts before you even start a mine or have a flow sheet? Can you do that? The answer is maybe. I don't know. Somebody's got to try, but nobody's asking the question, right? We have to ask those questions. And actually, in the lab years ago, I was playing around with that sort of thing and got to 10% without complicated chemistry. So I know it can be done. Of course, I'm a bit of a heretic as well, so that changes things. So we're looking at things like more effective resource definition, waste extraction, zero waste commodity extraction. And again, by doing things like continuous mining, changing the underground roadmap, the underground flow sheet, and also making sure that the waste we're extracting, or there's better differentiation between waste and ore grade underground before it goes to the surface. Why are we hauling 90% of the waste on surface? It doesn't make any sense. But it's hard to get people to change because we've been doing it for 70 or 80 or 100 years. And again, benign tailings. And there's two pieces, there's zero tailings and benign tailings. And benign tailings is, Elizabeth was talking about that, Brian was talking about that, we're both talking about that this morning, is how do you process existing tailings to extract the values, make them benign, and produce essentially beach sand. The guy running our environment project is a senior vice president. He said, yeah, let's create beach sand. Right? That's the intent at the end of the day. But if you do that, how does that apply to things like heap leaching? Right? We're always told in Canada, you can't heap leach, it's too cold. Well, the Finns are doing it, why can't we? There you go. Thanks for correcting me. Awesome. Essentially, at the end of the day, 80% reduction in closure costs. Now, the funny thing about closure, this is bizarre. I didn't understand this when I found this out, but closure in the mining industry is different within a company, between properties, between jurisdictions. It's just unbelievable. I was at a meeting, senior executive in the company and his director of environment, and I mentioned that one of our projects is looking at closure, a standardized framework for closure and closure criteria that essentially leads to relinquishment. It's a tough thing to do. There's only one province looking at relinquishment now, I think one property, but that's the target. When I presented this to this SVP, he goes, we're already doing that. And his director goes, no, we're not. I says, yes, we are. No, we're not. So they went outside and had the argument, they're not doing it. It's not happening. And if you're a regulator, you get this stuff, and you look at this discontinuity between closure planning, you start throwing things out, and it lengthens the timeline, it increases the mistrust within the communities, it's just not cost effective. So one of our projects is to look at that, streamlining the closure process. What's next? I couldn't not talk about geology, but please don't ask me any technical questions on this. I'm a dumb chemist. I've got somebody from our consortium here, so I'll nail him if any questions come up. He's smiling but not running. So on the trying to find new deposits, basically it's looking at how do we get them faster, quicker, less expensive, because you all know there's a challenge there, right? We had a meeting with 9 CEOs and COs yesterday in Toronto, and basically resoundingly one of the biggest concentrated issues is new deposits. It's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge. So one of our focus groups, our technical groups, is we call it the EIC, or Exploration Innovation Consortium. It's led by the VP of Geology, or VP of Exploration for Barrick Gold. And basically, I'm not going to go over this, but they're looking at key questions and challenges. You know, what are we looking for? Where are we going to look? How are we going to find it? How are we going to do it better? Okay, how to detect it? What does it mean? And a big piece of this is visualization. A second huge part of this is integration. I'll do this quickly so you can't ask technical questions. And basically the roadmap, and this is a dumbed-down version, our roadmaps are actually fairly significant, is basically looking at existing mature camps and new camps as well. So again, it's the new, it's the old, it's both. We're trying to combine those two because we can't shift an industry when you have 40, 50, 60, 70 years of legacy things in place right now. And importantly, it's integrating. It's integrating all of these things together. Most models integrate 1 or 2 or 3 pieces. And I think somebody was talking about integrated data earlier. It's integrating all of it together. This, if anybody wants all the details on this, there was an awesome paper written by Alan Galley, the resident exploration expert at CMIC at the CIM magazine, I think it was in August. It explains everything. It's fabulous if you want to go into the details. But it's about integration. This is the first 5-year step. The interesting part about this was a research project, and it's partially funded. NSERC was brought up. It's partially funded by NSERC. It broke 5 NSERC records. 5. We had it approved outside of scope. There had been a lot of rules to get this thing approved, and it was done in 6 months. The typical process for this scale of project is 1 or 2 years. 54 organizations, the largest initial consortium ever in the history of the organization. The largest investment in this field, initial investment in this field ever. So again, we're paradigm shifting how we also do research and innovation in Canada at the same time. Our pitch to the federal government is to actually have an innovation policy that works because we don't have one. And that's a very important piece here. It's integrating. And this is just to show who the members are. As I mentioned, we're a nonprofit organization. We're run by membership, and it's from academia, it's from government, it's from service providers, it's from mining companies, whoever wants to be involved. And again, it's really interesting in that this is climbing. A lot of associations during the decline in the industry and the contraction that we're in right now has gone down. Ours is going up about 5 to 10% a year. People are saying, we need to change, we need help, we're not sure what to do. So it keeps going up, and we're getting a lot of international attention as well. And again, these people are all collaborating, all working together to try and drive change in the industry. That's it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to. I'll be around here this afternoon as well. Thanks.